A sealed envelope crossed 3 national borders in silence, unseen by satellites, untraced by intelligence agencies, an envelope that carried not secrets, but something far more dangerous, conviction. It moved under cover of dusk, hidden in coat linings and cargo crates, until it reached the iron gates of Cuge prison. Buried in the tense heart of Abuja, inside that envelope were words simple enough to be whispered, but heavy enough to shake the pillars of an entire continent. At the exact moment that envelope arrived, President Bola Tinubu was grinning behind a podium in Eagle Square, basking in applause and sunlight. It was Nigeria's Democracy Day, and the square had been transformed into a theater of flags and fanfare. Military bands marched in rhythm, drones hovered above, children waved green and white, and across the country every major channel streamed the event live. Tinubu, dressed in royal agbada and surrounded by senators, generals, and loyal party members, leaned into the microphone. He mocked opposition leader Peter Obi, calling him a man chasing shadows in daylight. Laughter rippled through the crowd, ministers clapped, generals smiled. But then came the line that silenced even the breeze, and as for Nnamdi Kanu, Tinubu smirked, his voice carrying through the stadium. He will rot where he belongs forever. The applause was thunderous, but not all ears were clapping. In Nairobi, a young activist watching the broadcast clenched his jaw. In Boso, a retired soldier flicked off the TV in disgust. In the Sao, where sandstorms meet silence, a message was already being prepared by candlelight. And in Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traore stood still, eyes fixed on Tinubu's face. On the screen, not with rage, but with the calm fury of a man who had watched his people be silenced one too many times. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The message had already landed in his chest like a bullet. This wasn't just about Kanu. This was about something larger, about the future of an Africa that refused to kneel. Later that night, while the streets of Ouagadougou quieted and the stars reclaimed the sky, a single light glowed inside the presidential palace. Traore sat alone at his desk, pen in hand, writing with long, deliberate strokes. The letter was brief, but every syllable pulsed with weight, dignity, and defiance. When he finished, he folded it carefully, sealed it with his presidential mark, and handed it to a man waiting in the shadows, a young Malian, silent and sharp, dressed like a mechanic but trained like a ghost. No uniform, no entourage, just trust. Deliver this safely, Traore said. The man nodded once, tucked the letter deep into his jacket, and vanished into the dark. He traveled by bike, then hitched a truck, cutting across deserts and badlands, past ECOWAS patrols and checkpoints brimming with suspicion. He slept under the stars, hid in market crowds, drank from half-empty bottles, and moved with the urgency of a man carrying a future in his chest. Days later, beneath the fading sun of Abuja, he slipped the envelope into the hand of a prison worker, an old clerk who still believed justice was not a slogan but a calling. Inside Cuge prison, where steel bars had outlasted hope, Nnamdi Kanu sat alone, skin pale from months without sunlight, mind weathered by silence. When the letter was handed to him, he unfolded it slowly, unsure if he dared to believe. Just 5 words stared back at him. You are not forgotten. He read it once, then again, then a third time. And then, slowly, a smile, not of joy, but of resilience crossed his face. It was a smile of defiance, a smile of a man no longer alone. Across from him, his cellmate, a young protester from Enugu, noticed. What is it? He asked. Kanu held the letter to his chest and whispered, Africa hears me now. Who hears you? The young man asked. Kanu's eyes gleamed. The only leader left who remembers what freedom tastes like outside the cell. Guards laughed as radios played jingles about peace and progress. But in that dim prison room, something far more real was being born. Not noise, not violence, just a silence too powerful to ignore, a silence that would grow into a thunder no bullet could silence. And across the continent, far beyond barbed wire and TV cameras, that silence was beginning to echo. Back in Aso Rock, Nigeria's presidential villa of marble and power, the atmosphere had shifted. Inside a closed room, President Tinubu sat at the head of a long table, face hard, fingers tapping, eyes darting. Around him were Nigeria's most senior generals, advisors, and National Security Advisor Nuhu Ribadu. In front of them sat a fresh intelligence report, classified, urgent, unsettling. The headline read, President Traore sends letter to Nnamdi Kanu, operation underway across borders. And suddenly, the laughter from Eagle Square didn't seem so triumphant. Whispers were spreading. Not just rumors, not just gossip, but tremors of something bigger, something primal, a stirring, a pulse, a feeling that the wind itself was carrying. Something is happening, something powerful. In the Situation Room, deep inside Aso Rock, Nigeria's fortified presidential villa, National Security Advisor Nuhu Ribadu stood with his voice calm but firm, the air around him thick with tension. "Mr. President," he said carefully, "if Traore speaks, the Sao listens. He's no longer just a soldier, sir. He's become a symbol." "And Kanu," Ribadu's voice dropped, "he's a spark, waiting to catch fire." President Tinubu narrowed his eyes, the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders like iron. "Then we put out the fire." A cold hush fell across the room. "Shut down any media outlet that shares it," he ordered, his voice sharp and metallic. "Monitor Burkina Faso signals. If Traore plans to speak again, cut the feed. Jam their satellites. Block the relays. Silence him." Total silence. The generals nodded. Phones buzzed. Orders were dispatched within minutes. Satellite jammers were activated. Social media bots were deployed. Cyber units flooded timelines with curated stories of economic growth and state-sponsored patriotism. Billboards lit up with slogans. Cameras rolled for controlled interviews. But even as they moved, there was a growing, gnawing realization. This wasn't just about controlling the news anymore. It was about controlling belief. And belief once awakened was harder to kill than any man. As the meeting dissolved into frantic logistics, Tinubu leaned back in his leather chair, staring up at the ornate ceiling, his voice, low and full of spite, sliced through the silence. "This boy wants to be a hero," he muttered. "Let's remind him who holds the knife." But far beyond the marble and air conditioning of Aso Rock, across the red hills of the Sao, the knife no longer mattered. Because when truth finds its voice, no wall is thick enough to stop the echo. It started with a single post. A blurry photo, nothing more than an image of a letter held in Nnamdi Kanu's trembling hands, surfaced on a tiny activist page in Nairobi. No signature, no watermark, just one visible line, scrawled in sharp, deliberate handwriting. "You are not forgotten." No one needed a name. The words were enough. The truth had texture. The weight of it could be felt through the screen. Within hours, it was everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, Telegram, in WhatsApp groups from Lagos to Cape Town, in encrypted channels in Accra, in university dorms in Maputo. The hashtags exploded. Hashtag Voice of Africa, hashtag TRA or EACUTE KANU 20-5 #freedom is now in Zaria. Youth flooded the streets waving hand-painted flags. In Nairobi, crowds gathered at the Nigerian embassy. In Accra, students spray-painted murals, Kanu's face beside Traore's silhouette, flames rising behind them, chains snapping midair. Back inside Aso Rock, panic had taken over the digital war room. Flood the feed with distractions. Tinubu's media team barked economic reforms, infrastructure openings, anything. They paid influencers, called in favors, released feel-good propaganda. But the internet had already chosen its side. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about dignity. One by one, even celebrities began resharing the letter. Afrobeats, legends posted cryptic lyrics, poets recited verses in underground cafes, and a beloved Nollywood actress, her eyes red with tears, whispered in a viral video, "We forgot him." But Traore hadn't. He never forgot. Tinubu's face turned stone cold as he scrolled through the trending lists. It wasn't just a letter anymore. It was a breach in the dam. "We let one voice rise," he growled, "and now we have thousands." But outside the palace walls, those voices weren't afraid anymore. They were rising bold, clear, defiant, not for war, but for something far more dangerous to tyrants, freedom. And this time, the silence could not be bought. In a quiet studio in Kaduna, cameras rolled for a rare, unscheduled interview. Sitting under dim lights was retired General Musa Danjuma, once Tinubu's ally, a symbol of military honor and national pride. Now, his face looked older, wearier but steadier than ever. "I have watched the silence in this country grow louder," he began, "and I can no longer stand by." The host blinked. "General, are you saying you no longer support the president?" Danjuma didn't blink. "I'm saying Ibrahim Traore understands Africa in ways Abuja never will." The studio went still. Online, the clip went supernova. From barracks in Makurdi to camps in Enugu, whispers turned into conversations. "Did you hear what the general said? Maybe he's right." Inside Aso Rock, Tinubu shattered a crystal glass in fury. "He was my ally," he shouted. "He's just an old man chasing ghosts." But deep down, Tinubu knew, when the generals start shifting, the soldiers will follow. That night, Danjuma posted a message on his long-abandoned military blog. The words were short, sharp. Traore speaks like Sankara. He is not perfect, but he listens, and we need that now, more than ever. Africa deserves better, and across the continent, hearts began to beat faster, because even the mighty must answer to the truth. Then, something unthinkable happened. Across Burkina Faso, televisions went dark. No music, no ads, no talking heads, just silence, until a live feed sparked to life. There stood President Ibrahim Traore, alone in a shadowed room, clad in his worn brown military fatigues. A large map of Africa hung behind him, glowing faintly. There was no anthem, no introduction, no branding, only his eyes, burning with conviction. And then he spoke. To every African watching this, listen closely. Nnamdi Kanu is not a criminal. He is not a threat. He is not a prisoner. He paused. He is a prophet, and he speaks for us all. In kitchens in Bamako, mothers stopped cooking. In marketplaces in Lagos, taxi drivers turned up the volume. In Cape Town, students held their breath. In Windhoek, a journalist wept quietly. In Dakar, children turned to their fathers and asked, "Who is this man?" And still Traore spoke. They tried to silence him, but you cannot cage a voice that speaks for justice, not with chains, not with jails, not with fear. In Abuja, Tinubu's aides were in chaos. Cut the feed, they screamed. But it was too late. The stream was bouncing off satellite relays in Ghana, South Africa, even Europe. It had already crossed oceans. A revolution not in arms, but in truth had found its pulse. The internet caught like fire in dry grass. Across Africa, from the smoky rooftops of Lagos to the dry valleys of the Sao, the message wasn't just heard, it was felt. Traore had spoken, and once truth is spoken with clarity and courage, it echoes beyond borders. Standing tall in front of the map of Africa, President Ibrahim Traore took one final breath and delivered the words that would brand themselves into the heart of a generation. This is not just about one man. It is about what kind of Africa we want to leave behind, one where fear rules, or one where truth leads. And then the screen went black, but the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. It was the sound of a continent waking up, and from that moment on, no force on earth could put it back to sleep. Inside the marble halls of Aso Rock, calm was a fawade. Whispers curled like smoke through corridors. Ministers walked faster. Generals avoided each other's eyes. And President Bola Tinubu sat stone-faced in his private office. But behind that expression, he knew it. Something had shifted. Traore's speech had cracked open the walls. Not just the walls of Nigeria, but the psychological walls of power itself. The soldiers were watching, and worse, they were listening. That terrified him. Within an hour, Tinubu had summoned his top generals. The room felt colder than usual, the air heavier. Some officers stood too straight, too silent. Loyalty was starting to crack. "I want to reshuffle," Tinubu snapped, his voice slicing through the tension. "Move the loyal ones to key commands. Transfer anyone who's been quiet lately. I want full control before this turns into a fire." One general gave a stiff nod, but not with confidence. He knew what was coming, because word was already spreading. In the military camps of Kaduna, in the barracks of Ibadan, junior officers were sharing clips of Traore's speech on hidden phones. Kanu's name was being whispered during drills like a forbidden prayer. The rank and file were no longer unified by command, they were being divided by conscience. Tinubu spun in his chair and barked at his foreign advisor. "Get Washington on the line, or Paris, or Tel Aviv. I don't care if Traore is planning something bigger. I want to know before it hits me in the chest." That night, in a luxury hotel in Abuja under false names and layers of secrecy, a meeting took place. Representatives from powerful foreign embassies arrived silently. Some came with offers, money, surveillance tech, silent tactics. But even they saw what was behind Tinubu's eyes. Now panic. They didn't say it aloud, but they knew Africa was changing, and their grip was slipping. But while Tinubu plotted behind glass walls and encrypted phones, something more dangerous was spreading across the land. It moved without noise. It wore no uniforms. It flew no flag. But it passed from man to man, soldier to soldier, like dry wind brushing across open fields, and everyone knew what came next. If the army no longer feared the president, then the president had already lost half the battle, and the other half was listening to Traore. That night, Huge prison was quiet. No alarms, no shouts, only the low hum of fluorescent lights and the soft tapping of rain against steel roofs. Inside his cell, Nnamdi Kanu sat motionless. He didn't know what time it was. He didn't know what day. But he felt it. Something had changed. Far away in Ouagadougou, President Traore stood in his office, face lit by a single lamp. He handed a sealed document to his envoy, a man dressed in diplomatic attire. "This is not a rescue," Traore said, voice calm. "This is justice, quiet, clean, and African." The envoy, posing as a representative from ECOWAS, flew into Abuja under official clearance. His face raised no suspicion. His briefcase held only paperwork except for one forged transfer order, so perfectly crafted it might as well have been born from within Nigeria's own intelligence agency. At midnight, two unmarked vehicles pulled up to Cuge prison, headlights muted under heavy rain. Guards examined the documents. They saw familiar seals. They asked no questions. They opened the gates. No sirens, no resistance, no chains. Nnamdi Kanu, dressed in a gray hoodie and sunglasses, walked out of the prison gates a free man. By dawn, his cell was empty. The guards said nothing. The cameras didn't blink. Tinubu was still asleep. But across Nigeria, in mosques and military camps and morning markets, whispers had already begun. By sunrise, a jet touched down in Addis Ababa. The African Union summit was about to begin. And when the doors opened, the world gasped. And Nnamdi Kanu stepped off the plane not as a fugitive, not as a prisoner, but as a freeman, walking into history. No guns had been fired. No wall had been torn down. Only one thing had changed. Africa had decided to remember its own. The Grand Hall of the African Union was standing room only, every seat filled. Cameras rolled. Flags of all 54 nations lined the marble walls. But all eyes, all hearts were fixed on the stage. President Ibrahim Traore stood at the podium. Beside him Kanu, in a simple white tunic, his chin lifted high. Traore looked over the sea of faces. He began, "We gather not just as presidents, but as sons and daughters of a continent that has been silenced for too long. Today, we break that silence, not with fear, not with weapons, but with truth." He turned to Kanu and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. This man was caged not for crimes, but for courage, for saying what millions couldn't. And today, we say it clearly, Africa will no longer imprison its future. The hall erupted, phones buzzed, news channels broke into live coverage. In Lagos, people flooded the streets. In Bobo Dioulasso, students draped themselves in Burkina Faso's colors. In Nairobi, buses pulled over so passengers could listen to the radio. Back in Aso Rock, Tinubu watched it unfold alone. His cabinet had evaporated. His generals had grown quiet. On screen, Traore and Kanu raised their hands, joined not in victory, but in a promise. A new era was forming. But beyond the celebration, something darker stirred. In quiet corners of the summit, foreign diplomats whispered. Intelligence agencies made calls. Some asked the chilling question, what if others follow? Because while Africa was finally waking up, the old powers weren't asleep. They were watching. And though one voice had just shaken the continent, the question was now louder than ever. Would the fire spread and free the people, or would those in the shadows strike back before it could? If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Hit that like button. Subscribe for more powerful African stories. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and share this video if you believe it's time for Africa to rise.